Ezekiel today. And again, if you take a look at our lists, and one of the lists that we have over there, that is to my left, your right, of visions, is a vision of the new temple and the new Israel. And again, there are different ways of interpreting the Bible. I understand that. Wonderful Christian people who look at things differently. But if you take it as a literal prophecy, then you need to believe that this is millennial. And there is a time coming when Israel will be restored to the land, when the Messiah will be ruling, and Israel will be the center of the world, and the temple will be rebuilt and function in a ceremonial capacity. Okay. I hate to be critical of any one group, but I'm a member now of a group that receives online magazine articles from Proclamation magazine, and these are all former Adventists. And there was a major article this Friday on how Ellen White basically sewed the temple curtain back up. So we all know that when Jesus died on the cross, the temple curtain was ripped from top to bottom. It separated people from God. And most of us as evangelical Christians believe that that was very, very emblematic of the fact that it literally is finished. The atonement is accomplished. We now have direct access to God. Well, she literally didn't take a needle and thread and sew it back up. But her interpretation is that what happened was that the sanctuary moved from earth to heaven. And now Jesus has this work to do in heaven. Well, again, we believe it is accomplished. And so when we get to a passage of Scripture like this, when we talk about service in a new temple, this is, again, very symbolic. Okay? It is not necessary for our salvation. It is not necessary for the salvation of the Jews. Now, if you've been doing your Through the Bible reading, you have been reading in the book of Romans. And I love Romans chapter 3. And, you have the comparison between the Jew and the Gentile, the circumcised and the uncircumcised, and what profit is it? And Paul makes it extremely clear that no one is saved by keeping the law. Okay, the law points out our need for sin. So again, I believe this is symbolic in nature. Now, again, if you don't think that we should take this literally, there are other groups of people who take it quite literally. And if you take a look at the page of 79 of your study guide, you have a picture, and that picture looks like a wall, but it's not a wall. What is it a picture of? The closed up eastern gate. And so the Muslims, they believe that this prophecy is literal, and so they have walled up that gate. They have planted a Muslim cemetery in front of that gate, and they think it's done. The Messiah can't go through there. Well, guess what?
He already did.
He will. Yeah, he did and he will. And he did and he will. So, anyway. All right, so let's go to Ezekiel 44. Again, we're going to pretty much have to summarize the last few chapters, but then next week we're going to have to really make haste in Daniel. But if you could play verses 1 through 9 for us at 44, please.
Then he brought me back to the outer gate of the sanctuary, which faces toward the east. But it was shut. And the Lord said to me,
This gate shall be shut. It shall not be opened, and no man shall enter by it, because the Lord God of Israel has entered by it. Therefore it shall be shut. As for the prince, because he is the prince, he may sit in it to eat bread before the Lord. He shall enter by way of the vestibule of the gateway, and go out the same way.
Also he brought me by way of the north gate to the front of the temple. So I looked, and behold, the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord, and I fell on my face.
Son of man, mark well. See with your eyes, and hear with your ears all that I say to you concerning all the ordinances of the house of the Lord, and all its laws. Mark well who may enter the house, and all who go out from the sanctuary. Now say to the rebellious, to the house of Israel, thus says the Lord God, O house of Israel, let us have no more of all your abominations. When you brought in foreigners, uncircumcised in heart and uncircumcised in flesh, to be in my sanctuary, to defile it, my house. And when you offered my food, the fat and the blood, then they broke my covenant because of all your abominations. And you have not kept charge of my holy things, but you have set others to keep charge of my sanctuary for you. No foreigner, uncircumcised in heart or uncircumcised in flesh, shall enter my sanctuary, including any foreigner who is among the children of Israel.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's
So,
scary.
it is. It is. So this is a description of service of worship in the new temple. And again, it says in your study guide on the right-hand side, second paragraph, in this chapter, God revealed Ezekiel the routine operation of the future temple. He discussed the duties of the appointed ministers, the priests and Levites, and the means of their support. But even as the Lord described the holy practices that would be followed in the future temple, he found it necessary to call the people to account for their unholy practices in the present. So, when we get into this section now, there is debate amongst Bible scholars. Are you surprised? Bible scholars debate about everything and anything that you can debate over. But the question would be, who is this prince? And again, some believe it's the Messiah, some believe it is not the Messiah. And your study guide does not believe it's the Messiah because of several issues regarding who this person is. So they believe it's more of a political leader who's going to rule during this time. But I don't know again. But anyway, it says that this prince will be the only one allowed to enter and to eat there. And again, to me, it makes sense to be a messianic figure. But again, they have their reasons why they believe it is not. So anyway, so this is the Eastern Gate. And again, if you go to Israel today, what is interesting about the Eastern Gate, and I think we showed a video several years ago, that David Reagan interviewed this archaeologist who was actually walking through that cemetery on the weekend, and there had been a rainstorm, and all of a sudden the ground fell through, and he fell into this cavern. And when his eyes adjusted to the light, he realized he was looking at the remnants of a gate. And he tried to take some pictures, but there was very little light. So he crawled out, went back to school, and told his professor. The next day he went back, and the Muslims had already covered this over. But anyway, they believe that this is proof that the current Eastern Gate literally sits over the ancient Eastern Gate. The wall that is in Jerusalem today was built by Suleiman the Magnificent. And he attempted to enclose the old city of Jerusalem. He failed, or his architects failed, so they paid with their lives. But again, there's debate as to the location, but that was a gate. And so this is the picture that we have there. So now we go to the other end, to the northern end, which is interesting, which is not the normal entrance. The normal entrance would have been the southern end, where you have the double holy gates, where you have the stairs and the mikvahs and everything. But as the Lord takes Ezekiel in this vision to the northern gate, he sees that the glory of the Lord has again filled the temple. And remember what we read back when we were reading about Solomon? And when Solomon built the temple, and Solomon dedicates the temple, the priest had to flee because the glory of the Lord came down and filled the temple. What you just read about in the end of 2nd Chronicles was the destruction of the temple. God departed. God departed from Jerusalem, and the city was destroyed. But again, at the very, very end of 2nd Chronicles, you have a promise that comes with a decree from a foreign king. It was the decree of what? Cyrus. The decree of Cyrus to rebuild. Exactly. Right. And so
it's almost like that's an insert right at the very end of 2nd Chronicles.
Yes. A little hope.
Mm-hmm.
A little hope. And I'm going to say some more about that this morning when we mention our daily Bible reading. But as an extremely significant prophecy. And I'll say more about that later. So anyway, now the issue is rebellious Israel and their detestable practices. And most of us would think about their idolatry. And of course, as we've gone through 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, it fascinates me, especially the kings of Judah. You got one king, one bad king, one good king, one bad king, you know. One king tears down all these high places, all these altars to foreign gods. The next king comes along and rebuilds them, you know. It's absolutely, it's sad, but it's fascinating. But anyway.
Because I was trying to put that together in my heart, and I'm not saying I have a profound thing, but it's sort of like I think we're tempted to do too. God is enough. We don't need any more. It's like, okay, we've got God, but we'll bring in all these other guys just in case we haven't covered all of our bases. Well, I think we need to know, no, God is enough, period. We don't need anything else.
So you know what this reminds me of? You just read it in the book of Acts. Paul goes to Athens.
Mm-hmm.
And he walks through this big area, and he finally finds this monument that is addressed to whom? The unknown God. They were afraid that maybe they had left somebody out.
Yeah, so that's what they were doing.
Yeah, they're getting all their bases covered.
Maybe this is, God isn't enough. We'll just bring these other guys in too. But no. And I know that we're guilty of that. How good is my retirement plan? Mm-hmm. Oh, God is enough.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. But anyway, what is interesting here is that the condemnation is for their use of what?
Foreign people to take care of their stuff.
Yeah, especially the temple. Not only Gentiles, but uncircumcised Gentiles.
Especially
and uncircumcised in the heart. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Right. And so a time is coming when no one will be going to do service in the temple who is not circumcised in the heart and maybe even in the flesh. Again, you just read through Romans, and Paul makes it very clear that circumcision is just an outward sign. It has nothing to do with what is going on in the heart. But so anyway, it's not that God is not concerned about the Gentile people, because he is. Again, if you just read through Romans, what does Paul say? Isn't God the God of all people? Gentiles and Jews alike? Yes, he is, Paul says. And so, anyway, but basically the idea is that they profaned the temple, and if you don't believe that, go back and read 2nd Chronicles, you just read. How many times they did all sorts of things, even went in and busted the place up, and had to be how many times was it rebuilt? Man, Sutherland Enterprises could have cleaned up back then, Every time there was a meeting, you have to go back and do rebuilding again. Yeah, so anyway. All right, so let's go to the Levites and their service in verses 10 through 16.
The Levites, who went far from me when Israel went astray, who strayed away from me after their idols, they shall bear their iniquity. Yet they shall be ministers in my sanctuary, as gatekeepers of the house and ministers of the house. They shall slay the burnt offering and the sacrifice for the people, and they shall stand before them to minister to them. Because they ministered to them before their idols, and caused the house of Israel to fall into iniquity, therefore I have raised my hand in an oath against them, that they shall bear their iniquity. And they shall not come near me to minister to me as priest, nor come near any of my holy things, nor into the most holy place. But they shall bear their shame and their abominations which they have committed. Nevertheless, I will make them keep charge of the temple for all its work, and for all that has to be done in it. But the priests, the Levites, the sons of Zadok, who kept charge of my sanctuary when the children of Israel went astray from me, they shall come near me to minister to me, and they shall stand before me, to offer to me the fat and the blood. They shall enter my sanctuary, and they shall come near my table to minister to me, and they shall keep my charge.
So it's a good thing to be a Zadokite. How many of you have ever heard of Zadokites. But anyway, so what you have here is during this period of time that we just covered, before the Babylonian captivity, you have the Levites apparently cooperating with a lot of this idolatry and other things going on that was desecrating the temple. And so there was one group of Levites that did not, and they were the sons of Zadok, so we call them Zadokites. And as a result, in the future, God is going to honor this group with a special designation. They will be able to do some things that the other Levites cannot do. Interestingly enough, today in Israel, again, we showed that video just recently, three very interesting signs. One was the red heifer. The other was this farmer out by the Dead Sea who is now growing all these things that are needed for these oils. But the third was that they are building an institute out by the Dead Sea that has the exact same floor plans as the temple. It's not the temple. But they are training these Cohens, and again, they believe through DNA that they are descendants of these priests in all manners of what they would have to do in the temple, so that when a temple is rededicated, immediately they can go to work. So, very interesting. So with that in mind, let's take a look at page 81. There's a box there entitled The Beginnings of Jewish Clergy. Can somebody read that for us?
Levi was one of the 12 sons of Jacob, from whom the 12 tribes of Israel were descended. In the beginning, the Levites were no different from the other 11 tribes. But later, they were assigned a special place among God's people because they showed their devotion to the Lord when the rest of Israel worshipped the golden calf at Mount Sinai. That's in Exodus 32. The Levites were set apart for special religious duties. Those duties were divided among Levi's 3 sons, Kohath, Gershon, and Merari, whose descendants comprised the 3 clans of Levi. The family of Aaron, the brother of Moses, was set apart farther from the Kohathite clan to begin the priestly line in Israel.
So what is interesting, I was talking to Steve LeSueur the other day while Mark Sutherland was playing the daring young man on the flying trapeze. He was just doing all sorts of summit
You
circles.
didn't give me a call and invite me to come up there with you. I'm kind of torqued with that too.
But anyway, Steve grew up in Salt Lake City. He knows, and some of his relatives are Mormons. And he said that he had watched a video where somebody had snuck a little mini camp into the Mormon temple in Salt Lake City. And he said what was interesting is when you go to be baptized in that temple, you go into a huge hall. And in the hall, there is a gigantic golden ox. Yeah, and if that doesn't send chills down your spine, because again, what were the people of Israel condemned for at the foot of Mount Sinai?
It makes you wonder how often, why Satan likes this golden calf image so much, but he must.
Yeah,
Because it just keeps reappearing.
yeah, over and over again.
It's frightening.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so there's many other things that are frightening about the temple. We have a video, I think, still in the church library, and I think it's an old VHS video of that some former Mormons have made, and they do the recreation of a temple ceremony, and it's quite scary. It really is very, very scary. Yes.
It just occurred to me, is that a mockery of the cow, the sacrifice, the burnt offering? That's what I'm trying to say. The burnt offering was the red heifer, and now Satan's trying to substitute it with a golden cow?
Could be.
That's certainly a possibility.
Again,
We know Satan is greatly into doing stuff that looks like it's kind of sort of right, but it's way wrong.
Yeah, counterfeit.
the other thing you need to realize is that just a few years ago, I learned a definition of the Antichrist that I never understood before. Anti can mean against, but it can also mean instead of. like a substitute, like a false Christ.
Mhm.
And so, most of the times we think of anti being against, but it can be instead of. And so, yes, yeah.
That beast, that cow, calf, bull, was the same thing was happening at that huge religious ceremony that they had in connection with King Edward.
Oh, right, yes.
Yeah.
The woman riding the beast.
Yeah.
Mark is talking about a video that was filmed just a couple years ago before King Charles became king, when he was still a prince. There's this gigantic games that they have for all of the British Empire. All these countries send representatives, and their opening ceremony, it was absolutely scary. They had this woman riding the beast, and they had these stars coming down from heaven, and wow. Yeah. Yeah, literally, it was weird. And this is not something that somebody's just talking about. They actually had video of the ceremony. There he is, the moderator, the MC, whatever you want to call it, of this huge event. So. All right, so the future of the priestly line of Zadok. And again, it was during Solomon's reign that Zadok was appointed chief priest over the temple. And because of this, God has a very, very special place for the Zadokites in the future. And they're going to be allowed to go in and be mediators for the people. But again, this is symbolic, okay? This is not dependent on their salvation. This is symbolic of what has been already taught. All right, let's go to the attire and conduct of the Levites, and then I'm really going to get myself in trouble this morning. I guarantee.
And it shall be, whenever they enter the gates of the inner court, that they shall put on linen garments. No wool shall come upon them, while they minister within the gates of the inner court, or within the house. They shall have linen turbans on their heads, and linen trousers on their bodies. They shall not clothe themselves with anything that causes sweat. When they go out to the outer court to the people, they shall take off their garments in which they have ministered, leave them in the holy chambers, and put on other garments. And in their holy garments they shall not sanctify the people. They shall neither shave their heads, nor let their hair grow long, but they shall keep their hair well trimmed. No priest shall drink wine when he enters the inner court. They shall not take as wife a widow or a divorced woman, but take virgins of the descendants of the house of Israel, or widows of priests. And they shall teach my people the difference between the holy and the unholy, and cause them to discern between the unclean and the clean.
Okay, first of all, a couple of comments. I watched a very interesting video last night. I don't consider Glenn Beck necessarily a Christian. I think he's even a Mormon. But he was interviewing this Jewish guy who was the photographer on the Shroud of Turin.
Documentary?
Not documentary, investigation. And anyway, he's a forensic photographer. Anyway, Glenn Beck said, well, why do they even think that the shroud could be the shroud of Jesus? Because the carbon dating dated it far, far later. He said, because the carbon dating came after his investigation, but a number of years later, the British Museum finally released the entire report. And what they found out was the carbon dating was done on one tiny little swatch from the edge of the garment, which they now believe was a repair to the garment. For instance, there is cotton weaved into this repair, and the rest of the garment is linen, totally linen. They could tell this through microscopic investigation. And again, this goes along with the priests, this goes along with burial cloths. And so the Jews had a prohibition of mixing types of fabric. Right, yeah. And so anyway, they are convinced now that this edge that has been carbon dated a lot later was actually a repair. And so if you take a look at the main garment itself, it is 100% linen and goes back to the time of Christ. Now, again, this guy, Mr. Schwartz, is a Jew. He is not a believer, but he is not willing to say that this could not be the burial cloth of Jesus. And again, he said there is absolutely, positively no scientific explanation for how this image got on this cloth.
You know, they've produced a way to create a similar image. I think I might have mentioned this before, but it takes an intense amount of energy for a very, very small split second of time. And that's the only way that they've been able to create anything like it. So it's just really interesting to think of when the Spirit came back into the Lord Jesus' dead body, that there was that flash of energy that created that image on the
It's at least sensible. Not
Yeah.
to say it's true, but it
Well,
makes sense.
What he said was he spent days and hours photographing every minor part of this. And he said there is absolutely no indication that anything external has ever been put onto that piece of fabric. No paint, no dye, no anything. So, okay. Now, here's where I'm going to get myself into trouble. This is worship in the temple. And here, according to your study guide, the whole concept was they were not supposed to do anything common or worldly in the temple worship. And so they even had these special clothes and fabric that they put on. These priests who would go in and do this couldn't even be wool, so they would sweat the whole thing. So here's my comment. And again, I'm not trying to be critical, but I'm a little bit concerned about modern worship style. Because number one, the style seems to be extremely, what I would consider to be worldly. I've gone to a number of events and I stand there and I look and I can't tell whether I'm at a rock concert or I'm at a worship service. But the other thing is that it is very common now for the worship leaders, I'm not talking about the people, but for the worship leaders to wear jeans and tennis shoes and these kind of Western shirts and just they look like they just walked in off the street. And it's very common, okay? And I understand the reason for that is they're trying to make seekers comfortable. So that, you don't walk in and you don't see the pastor in a suit and tie or a robe or anything like that. But everybody's common. But it's just interesting to me that here in the temple, God bent over backwards to make sure that the worship time would not be common. It would be special. It would be sanctified. And so again, I'm not being overly critical, but I'm just saying that I do have concerns.
I can bail you out. It's easy because it always goes back to the heart and the intent of those people who are doing it. If those worship leaders are up there to style, that's the problem. But if it's simply their heart is praising the Lord, and God's going to know the difference.
Well, again, when you go into a darkened room that has all these flashing lights and fog machines and loud rock music, seriously, I feel like I'm at a rock concert. And so anyway, again, I'm not being critical as I am saying I'm concerned that we don't want to make things too common. And here's a time where God is making it special.
You know what? That fits with this whole Zadokite thing. There was that one group who refused to go along with all this other stuff. And I'm convinced that there are numbers of pastors and leaders who are not Zadokites in our current culture. They're going to include all this other stuff. Even going so far as to what's the word I want?
Well, when they put rainbows outside their church, that says something.
Yeah.
And it's not the rainbow of Noah.
And to ordain homosexuals,
Yes, yeah.
which God has clearly said is wrong, then they're clearly not Zadokites. They're over in this other camp. So I think it still applies.
I like Charles Spurgeon. I don't agree with everything that Charles Spurgeon wrote because he was kind of a modified Calvinist. I don't think he was a dyed-in-the-wool Calvinist, but kind of a modified. But he said a lot of really, really good things He was the pastor of this huge metropolitan church in London back in the 1800s. But anyway, he said that culture should never influence the church. The church should influence culture.
Very powerful. I guess that's what I was trying to say, as Spurgeon said it in one word. Thank you, Spurgeon.
So, yes, our comments are Spurgeon-y. All right, would somebody read the box on page 83 entitled Tithes and Offerings?
The people of God were expected to bring the best of the first fruits and special gifts for the priests, Ezekiel 44. This offering of the first portion might have been considered a tithe. The tithe in Old Testament times was literally a tenth of an individual's accumulated wealth. That wealth, according to the law, consisted of the produce of the land and livestock. Leviticus 27. One tithe the Israelites were commanded to give went to the Levites for their inheritance. From that tithe, in turn, the Levites were instructed to give a tithe of the tithe, to the priests for their livelihood. Numbers 8. The word offerings often meant sacrifices and offerings in general, like the burnt in Leviticus 1, grain in Leviticus 2, and fellowship in Leviticus 3, and sin in Leviticus 4-7. Offerings. In Malachi 1:7, however, it seems to refer to the portion of the offerings and tithes set aside for the priests. Without those offerings, tithes and offerings, the priests and Levites would have been required to turn to secular work in order to support themselves.
So what is interesting in all of this is that, first of all, when we think of first fruits, we don't fully understand all that's involved. I read an article recently that grain farmers, whether it be wheat or barley or whatever in those days, would actually walk out into their field, and the very first stalks that would bud out, they would tie like little ribbons to them. And because they came on first, and theoretically, and again, we've seen that here in the Walla Walla Valley this year, when the weather changes, things can shrivel up quite quickly. And so these that were maturing first were probably the best, okay? And so for the farmer to take the best of his crop, the first of his crop, and give it to the Lord to be destroyed, okay? Basically, I realize the priests and Levites ate some of it, but this is nothing you'd ever get back in return. This is gone. The other thing is that it really hit me as I was reading through the Chronicles again. It's just so hard to read about all these animals being killed and slaughtered, and you know how the king gave so many thousand of this and so many thousand of that. Realize that basically that was wealth in that day and age. Yes, there was some coinage. There were no paper dollars. There was no stock market as we know it today. No IRAs.
They had a lot of stock.
Huh?
They had a lot of stock.
Yes, but their stock was moving. Yeah.
What kind of stock market?
Yeah. But so this to give up your animals is to be giving up some of your wealth, and to have these animals killed and then burned, they're gone. So it's almost as if you took opened your little safe and you took out some of your stock portfolio and you took and you burned those bonds. They're gone. Okay? They're gone forever. And they're a sacrifice to the Lord. And so that really hit me this time as we went through. And again, there was the required ones, and then there is the sacrificial offerings, and there's various different types. By the way, why the prohibition of the priest drinking the wine that is brought? Well, if you take a look at page 84 of your study guide, you remember there's two guys, Nadab and Abihu. Okay, they were two of Aaron's 4 sons, and they were consumed by fire because they offered an unauthorized fire before the Lord. The thought is that alcohol may have been involved. They may have been drunk. Okay, and so there is this prohibition here where the priests from drinking any of the wine when they're in service of the Lord in the temple, so they are not under the influence at all. Wine was very, very important in that day, and again, we could spend the whole time talking about that whole issue. But again, it too was brought as a sacrifice. I mean, they would just take some of their choicest wine and just pour it out. It was gone, you know. And so, but they were not to do that. And then there's restrictions regarding marriage, as to who they were allowed to marry. And again, only virgins. It's interesting, your study guide points out that in Ezekiel's vision, no mention is even made of a high priest. Why is there no high priest?
Oh, we know that answer.
What's the answer?
We have only one.
Exactly, exactly.
Our
Right,
great high priest.
right. Jesus is our high priest. And if you don't understand what that means, go back and read the book of Hebrews. And Hebrews talks in great detail about that. So, and again,
I was just gonna mention that connection with these offerings, you could only offer freely like that if you really believed that the Lord was real and that He was going to keep you and help you and prosper you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to do it with a free will. It would be by bondage only, you know. But for us, that's the only thing the Lord is happy with, is a free will offering that we give.
so, I was gonna make a comment about that, and it just went right in one side and out the other.
Go stopping in there.
Well, I was watching what Mark was doing there, and all of a
Sorry.
sudden I couldn't think about what I was gonna say. I do wanna make comment though, there at the very bottom of page 84 on the left, it says, Peter declared that Christians are a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. So again, we are a royal priesthood today. Today we are the temple of God, and because the Holy Spirit lives within us. A time is coming when we should be.
And it's never wasted. I mean, people might have thought, well, if I give something and I don't have anything there, I don't have any left. But whatever is given to God, of free will, He looks on that as something very special, and He'll never be our debtor.
I know what I was going to say now. What I was going to say is this is not what the prosperity preachers are talking about on TV. They talk about seeds, seed giving, so that if you are poor and you don't have enough money to hardly pay your rent, if you send them $100, it's like planting a seed. And how when you plant a seed in the ground, it grows and multiplies, so now you have a whole bush full of beans or whatever. So if you give them your seed money, God is going to bless you. And that's not what we're talking about here. Okay. And again, that is definitely an ulterior motive. You are giving to get more. Okay. And again, what I see here is I agree with Mark. God bless the people. If you take a look at some of these good kings of Judah, when they had a heart for God and were serving God, God blessed the nation. They did. Okay. That's not why they gave. So again, when you came and when you offered your animal and they killed it and then you watched it being burned, it was gone. That's it. You literally gave it away. There was no getting it back. So.
But in our case, you know, I think our gifts can be multiplied, you know, worldwide in reaching hearts for Jesus. I think our little, I shouldn't say little, but in comparison to this ministry we have with the boxes, you know, and time is given to put that all together, and yet it can reach a heart someplace 10,000 miles away that we may never know, but think we'll meet them in heaven.
Right, so that we have been blessed because of the internet, that we had just a little bit of an inkling where some of our boxes have gone and the appreciation that some people have. But there's this beautiful song that we've played before about when this guy dies and goes to heaven, he's greeted by all these people, you know, You know, you don't remember me, but you taught my Sunday school class or whatever. You don't remember me, but when the missionaries came, you gave. Because of that, I believed, and things like that. So, all right, let's go to the priests and their service in verses 24 through 31.
In controversy they shall stand as judges, and judge it according to my judgments. They shall keep my laws and my statutes in all my appointed meetings, and they shall hallow my Sabbaths. They shall not defile themselves by coming near a dead person. Only for father or mother, for son or daughter, for brother or unmarried sister, may they defile themselves. After he is cleansed, they shall count 7 days for him. And on the day that he goes to the sanctuary to minister in the sanctuary, he must offer his sin offering in the inner court. It shall be in regard to their inheritance that I am their inheritance. You shall give them no possession in Israel, for I am their possession. They shall eat the grain offering, the sin offering, and the trespass offering. Every dedicated thing in Israel shall be theirs. The best of all first fruits of any kind, and every sacrifice of any kind from all your sacrifices shall be the priest's. Also you shall give to the priest the first of your ground meal, to cause a blessing to rest on your house. The priests shall not eat anything, bird or beast, that died naturally, or was torn by wild beasts.
You mean no roadkill?
No, sorry.
Oh, you can't go to the Roadkill Cafe anymore?
I'll just stay out of McDonald's.
Well, there's a Leroy Troy is a country western comedian singer, and he has this hilarious song of this possum in his headlights tonight. Oh, the family's gonna have stew tonight, you know, because he sees this possum and he turns on his brights and hits the gas, you know. So, but anyway, what is interesting here, and I am not trying to defend these first two categories, but you remember the parable of the Good Samaritan. And Jesus is talking about this road that went from Jericho to Jerusalem. And if you've ever made this trip, it is very steep. Like in 15 miles, you go from like 2,400 feet above sea level to 1,100 feet below sea level. Okay, in 15 miles. And even today, it is quite a steep and windy road. In fact, our bus had to pull over because one of our tour members got sick. You know, it's quite a road. And then when we left Jerusalem, we went down the Wadi Kelt, down the gravel dirt road, and you know, there's a canyon down there. My wife would have loved this road. It's her type of road. So back in Jesus' day, it was a windy, narrow road with lots of crags and hidden spots, and it was notorious for robbers. And you have the story of this poor Samaritan, poor guy being robbed. And the priest and the Levite walk by, and they see this guy laying in the ditch, all bloody. And they walk on the other side and keep on going. Why? Because of this. They would be defiled if they went over and checked on him and he was a dead body. Now how are they going to do their service when they get up to Jerusalem? So they just assumed that the poor guy was dead or dying. Sorry, guy. And they don't touch him. The Samaritan, on the other hand, goes over, finds that the guy has been wounded gravely. He takes him to this inn. He washes him up. He cleans him. He pays for his stay and goes on. You know, and next time I come through, if there's anything else that is owed, I'll pay you. You know, and again, this is Jesus' answer to who is my neighbor. Okay, and remember, the Samaritans were hated. They were considered dogs. And so the Samaritan turns out the hero of the story, and the priest and Levite are the goats. But again, it ties in with this, that they weren't supposed to be around dead bodies. In fact, during Jesus' day, he accused the Pharisees of being whitewashed what?
Sepulchres.
Tombs. Why was that? Again, they were so superstitious that they thought if they accidentally came upon a burial site and touched it, that this would make them unclean. okay? Because again, you had a body that's desiccating there, and so they would take a whitewash and paint these to warn them, don't touch this, okay? And then once a year, was it, or once every 2 years, they would go through and open it up, and they would take out the bones, and they would put them in ossuaries, bone boxes, and store them elsewhere. But anyway, so this is this part of this whole issue of not coming in contact with the dead. Now, that sounds very superstitious to us, but what did we just go through for the last few years? COVID. You know, you gotta maintain 6 feet distance from other people, you've gotta wear a mask, you've gotta sanitize your hands, because there's such a fear that we're somehow going to transport these germs. Okay, and in those days, again, there were all sorts of diseases, and you don't know why the person died, and if their body's rotting, they did not do embalming, you know, you did not touch the dead. So.
I was just gonna say, there might have been some superstition in connection with COVID-19 too.
Well, I just read another article this morning, and yeah, I guess I shouldn't get into it politically, but scientists are now finding other possible side effects from these vaccines, and so, yeah, anyways. All right, so if we go to page 85 of your study guide, on pages 85 and 86, there is a summary of the end of the book of Ezekiel, 45 to 48. Can somebody read that for us, please?
In Ezekiel 45, allotments of the new land reserved for the priests and Levites, the whole house of Israel and the priests were delineated. Next, Israel gave the Israelite princes
Ezekiel.
Ezekiel gave the Israelite princes God's direction for proper conduct toward the people of Israel. Finding the proper related instructions on the required preparation and procedure for presenting offerings and celebrating holy days. One of the most impressive descriptions in the entire book of Ezekiel is that of the river that flowed from the temple in the new land. That's in Ezekiel 47. You see also in Joel and Zechariah and Revelation. Wherever the river went, it gave life. Whether the river is only symbolic or represents a literal feature of restored Israel, it is purely a beautiful picture of the life-giving power of Christ. Ezekiel revealed the boundaries of the New Jerusalem and indicated the apportionment of the land among the 12 tribes, the priests and the Levites and the princes. The prophet concluded his vision and prophecies with a description of the city of Jerusalem in the new land. This city will be 6 miles in circumference with 12 gates, each bearing the name of one of the 12 tribes of Israel. But the most remarkable thing about the city is its name. The Lord is there. This will indeed be the city of God.
So let me say that in my personal opinion, this is the millennial land. This is different than the new heaven and the new earth and the new Jerusalem that is yet even to come. This is a restored Israel. So again, for those who say, well, this is just all symbolic, okay, but again, this has never literally been fulfilled. And so if you take a look at a literal fulfillment, then we have to say this is yet to come. And because God doesn't lie, God keeps his promises. And so we look forward to a literal time. And again, it's interesting, it says the name of the city will be the Lord is there. As we went through 2nd Chronicles especially, how many times did the Lord tell the people that he was going to have to leave? That he had promised to be there, but because of their sin and now the destruction of the city, he would have to leave. He would no longer be present in that city. But again, Jerusalem is a holy city, and he will return. When you go there today, it is very impressive, and you definitely get a spiritual feeling about the whole place, but it is not the restoration that is talked about here. That is yet future. In fact, there's actually a syndrome that some people fall into when they visit Israel, where they almost lose it spiritually, almost think they're prophets or something. But that is yet to come. So, all right, we need to switch gears and get ready for our worship time.